We are going live. It's we are live, folks, and it's good to be alive. I'll start there. As far as we know, it's good to wake up each day. How are you, folks? Good to be here. My name is Andre Chumley, and you're on Make Weird Music on our YouTube channel, etc. And this is a show I do every 2 weeks. It's called Confronting Creativity, where we talk to creatives and artists and people behind the scenes and people in front of the scenes. So we have someone tonight who is all of those things and more. I always say this. I'm lucky when when I'm interviewing somebody that I've known for quite some time, and this is the case. This is my dear friend Bob Musso, Robert Musso, and we're going to meet him tonight. Those of you who don't know who he is, and as I've been saying to people, just go flip through your record collection. You'll probably have 16 records in a few minutes that he worked on. Bob graduated from Rutgers University with degrees in economics and recording engineering. He's a guitarist. He became a studio musician after college, many years with some great recordings in New York City. And then he segued into production and engineering, and he's worked now on over 2,000 records, over 20,000 individual tracks, countless tours around the world, both as a guitarist and as technical support, front of house engineering, recording engineer. So we got a lot of stories from this man. He's got dozens of records that we're going to talk about and some new material. And we're going to talk about some of his journeys in sound over these past few decades. That is the small introduction of this gentleman. Bob, how are you today? Good to see you.
Thank you. It's great to see you as well. Oh, wait, we have a little bit of delay, so you can turn down my audio. And other times, other people will mix them, and I'll hear the final results when they're done. And I'm okay with that. And I've also been getting a fair amount of work of people sending their files to me, and I've been mixing them here at home because a lot of the studios have been had a lot of restrictions or just plain closed during the pandemic. So. But, that being said, I've been getting a lot done and I have been playing on a lot of records. So, that's good. And I feel positive about that. And I'm very happy to still be in it, and talking to you right now is great.
That's awesome. I've talked to so many people in sound production and engineering and mastering that say similar things that, it sucks what's happening, but you're busy. So, I see you're in your New York home studio, correct? And that's also something that you've seen kind of change over these decades, right? And you've worked in some amazing studios. Is there, other than drums, is there really much you have to do outside of your own studio?
Drum and a horn section, and pretty much everything else I could do here. So, if it's excessively loud, if somebody wants to, bring in 3 Marshall stacks, obviously it's not going to work in my home. But, short of that and the time of day, I can get a lot done here. And I do a lot of recording. I've got a fair selection of, amplifiers and instruments that people can use. But it's really my home studio. And so I'm mostly doing it all myself and just getting files from other people. And, it's funny because the drummers I know, they have some place where they can play and get recorded, which is great. And the bass players I know, they have some place where they record and they can send me files. And it's the same thing with the horn players and the DJs and the vocalists for the most part. And it's only when you really want to get the interaction and the production at the moment going between these musicians that you don't have that personal interaction at that very moment, which is tough. Because when you're in the studio and there's just a glass between them, you could just hit the talk back and say, oh, that was great. Watch the phrase at the end of the second line, or careful of the pitch, or come in a bit earlier, let's try to blend in a little more, or a crescendo at the end or something, and that immediate give and take isn't there nowadays when you're doing things, when you get a file from somebody that's 3,000 miles away. And so, if it's not right, you do have, there is an element of it's great except for this little part. Can you do it? Or, I'm going to have to edit this just to change it a little to make it work with what else is going on. And, if people are cool with that, then I'm okay, and I've been doing that for a long time, because I've been doing that forever anyway. If somebody says, oh, it's just a little part, that's not right, well, you do it, I'm like, oh, okay, all right, and then I'll do it, and it's just a little part, so I won't get credit for it or anything, but it's done and it sounds good, and that's the main thing.
That's a great response, and so much packed into that. And it reminds me of something I've always thought of, listening to the work that you've done over the decades, but also simultaneously coming to see you play, whether it's the Knitting Factory, the Court Tavern, or different places around the tri-state. And I think what's really interesting, and I love reading interviews with engineers, and I read Tape Op, and I read different audio magazines, of course, and just love getting into that mindset of folks like yourself who've produced so many amazing records. And there's some of them that are musicians. A lot of them have kind of gone past it, though, and kind of, I love that you've always been totally in the game, always putting out records, always doing just as much with your own craft and performance. And I think it's reflected in even what you just said, the way that you really can roll up your sleeves in a session, and you're an active player, you're always doing stuff. So I think that's something to be noted, and people should know that. We're going to talk about some of the records that you've done. Of course, we can just touch the tip of the iceberg, but talk to us a little bit about what you've been working on recently. And you mentioned drummers, and I know you've done so much work with G. Calvin Weston, and you got some stuff, some projects coming up. Talk to us about that, and we'll listen too.
Yeah. Calvin and I have played on and off together for years, and we were never in a group or anything. It was always a one-off gig here or there. And my friend Jerome Parker Wells called me up last year and said, hey, I've got some tracks from Calvin. Are you interested in playing on them? And I said, sure, send them over. And so that's how it began. It began with one track, and I played a very long solo on it, which I didn't know if he was going to like or not, because it was a long solo. How long do you really want to hear a solo for? But they liked it. And so they sent me more tracks, and now we have an album that is almost finished. Hopefully I'll be mixing the last song tomorrow here. Then I'll be done, and then it just gets mastered, and that'll come out. And that's a group that has Calvin Weston, myself, and Jerome Parker Wills on it. And there are a fair amount of guests, of horn players and keyboard players and lots of other folks that are friends of ours. Oh, your audio went off on me. I'm not hearing you anymore. Can you hear me?
Sorry. Yes, I'm there. That's fantastic, and we'll definitely check. We'll check a track or two out on that in a minute. Okay. Now it's overwhelming, the amount of data points we have with this man over the past 40 years. But I wanted to make sure people know also his websites, and we have some links of his websites that we have up, or we're about to put up. MussoMusic.com is a great place to go. Bob founded a record company in 1986, the independent label, I should say, not record company, label MuWorks, which then became MussoMusic, and to this day, still releasing original music, emphasis on improvised music, adventurous, eclectic music. And you've released records by Thomas Chapin, your dear late friend, but also Last Exit, Lunar Bear Ensemble, and Machine Gun. And all three of those are groups that anyone in the tri-state New York area into avant-garde music, into the downtown scene. Talk to me a little bit about some of those. Let's start with Last Exit, because that was my entry point to all four of those musicians, Sonny Sharrock and Ronald Shannon and Brock Smith and Laswell.
Was super group of progressive improvisation. Bill Laswell and Peter Brotzman, just world-class improviser. And then Ronald Shannon Jackson, drums, who used to play with Ornette Coleman. And of course, my man, Sonny Sharrock on guitar. You played with Herbie Mann, as you know, and was a big influence for myself, and I believe yourself as well. And they just completely destroyed me. I was so impressed and taken by their energy and their musicianship. To really improvise like that is something else. It's not just something that happens every day like that. And it really greatly impressed me, to be humble about it. And it humbled me to become a better guitar player and a better musician when I heard them. And so that was my kind of a wake-up call to aggressive improvisation, because I was into it before, but not like that. I was I studied jazz, and I was in Grateful Dead cover bands, which was really wonderful, and I loved jamming all the time. But Last Exit really kind of was a whole nother story. And that gave me the incentive to do my own thing. And I was trying to think of who I could do that with and what it could be. And I didn't want to do the exact same thing as Last Exit. And so then I thought about it, and I came up with Machine Gun, which were friends of mine from mostly the Rutgers area, as well as my friend John Ritchie, who did the cut up poetry and tape manipulation, which was different than Last Exit, and which is cool because he did the Paul Bowles and the cut up vibe of the beatniks, and we put that with our aggression and improvisation, and that was Machine Gun. And it really, really, really came from me listening to Peter Brotzman's FMP label. And he had a label called Free Music Production. And he had an album called Machine Gun on that. And it completely destroyed me again. And I named Machine Gun after that album, my group Machine Gun after that album. A lot of people think it's after the Jimi Hendrix song, which I think is great. I love Hendrix, don't get me wrong. I love the man and love his playing, big influence on me as well. But the improvisational part of Machine Gun was really coming from the Peter Brotzman FMP record, Machine Gun. And so Last Exit influenced me with Sonny Sharrock and these incredible improvisers to start Machine Gun with John Ritchie as the cut-up tape manipulator, as well as Thomas Chapin on saxophone and flute, and some poetry, and with Bill Bryant on drums, and Jerome Parker Wells, who I'm doing this new album with now, on bass, and I played guitar and six-string bass, and that was Machine Gun.
That's awesome. And I was fortunate to see Machine Gun a couple times at the good old Court Tavern. And, John's another dear friend who I've done a bunch of playing with. So this is great because that taps into, when you're growing up, and I was in college in New Brunswick, and you don't realize, but as the years have gone by, and I see how much came out of New Brunswick, whether it was Ween or the early Rollins band, or, Lenny Kaye taught at Rutgers, and just so many, Glenn Burtnick, so many great diverse musicians came out of that little club, the Court Tavern, and including Machine Gun. So many great gigs. I'm going to go to a track then, and tell me about this, and I'll tell you which one that we'll play here. This one is called Live at 5 Mix.
Oh, okay.
So I'll play it, and you can, after we listen to a bit, tell us a bit about it.
Okay.
So here we go, folks. Wow, just a little taster there. That is awesome. Some frenetic guitar starting to happen as that warmed up, and so tell us who's on that track too. That's G. Calvin Weston. Who else? Yourself and who else?
Myself and Jerome.
That's hopefully coming out later this year, I guess. That
Yeah,
project.
yes,
Yep,
yes.
with Jerome and
Yeah,
Calvin
yeah.
and
Yeah. Like I said, one more song to mix tomorrow, and then has to get mastered. So what you're hearing isn't even mastered yet. That's just a mix. So it's all a process. We have to get the cover together, So hopefully, yeah, before the end of the year, it'll be out. And
that's awesome.
I think the project would be WMW, but it doesn't roll off the tongue. But it's our last names, first letters of our last names. So I think that's going to be the title of the project. But I'll have to check with the other guys and make sure we're all cool with it.
That's awesome. Well, a nice sneak preview, which we'll have a couple of, and that Jerome is here. So Jerome, if you want to put the keyboard player's name, in the mix there, which no problem at all, Bob. The fact that you could remember anything on a daily basis, because this man again is when you can rattle off names like Material, Sly and Robbie. Whitney Houston, we're going to talk about that in a second, working with Stevie Wonder, Bob Dylan, the Ramones, Iggy Pop, Blondie, Pharoah Sanders. The list is endless. Let's reflect on a few of these. You were the first studio recording session that Whitney Houston was ever involved in. Tell us about a young Whitney Houston coming into the studio and what record that was.
That was for the Material record, titled One Down, and the song that she sang on was called Memories. And I recorded her at RPM Studios, and she was kind of nervous because it was the first time I think she was in a recording studio recording, because before that, I think she had just sung in churches. Because when she was in the studio and I gave her a set of headphones, and she put them on, she seemed uncomfortable wearing the headphones, like she wasn't used to listening to her voice through the cams, through the headphones. And so I asked her, I tried to make her feel comfortable. I said, is there anything I could do? I could turn your voice up or down, or I can make anything louder or quieter, or if you'd like a little reverb or any other effects on your voice, let me know. I'll get it, however you want it. And, she kind of looked at me surprised, like, oh, you can do that, And she said, no, it's fine. It's great. And I think it was 2 takes. I think she did it in 2 takes. And that was the whole session is her recording her vocal on that song in just 2 takes. And it was phenomenal. And it was just like that pure Whitney voice that you're familiar with when you hear her records now, except it was probably 4 or 5 years before that. And so she was young and she sounded like a young Whitney Houston. Now, the funny part about that session is the same session, same day, Archie Shepp came in and recorded saxophone on that same song. And I mixed that song the same day. So we recorded Whitney Houston and we recorded Archie Shepp, and then I mixed the song. But the funny part was that Archie played in the solo section, which is in the middle of the song, and guys wanted him to play in the intro, and he's like, "Oh no, I'm done," and he walked out. So he never played on the intro. And I noticed that the intro chords were the same as the chords on the solo. And so I told Bill and Michael, I said, I could take that solo and I could record it and I could fly it into the solo because it's the same chords. And they had no idea what I was talking about because I didn't know what a fly-in was. And so I did it, and I recorded the sax solo on a piece of tape, and I rewound the multi-track, and I played the half-inch piece of tape that had the saxophone on it on the intro, starting at the right point on the 2-track, and then recording it on the multi-track. And so I flew in the sax solo that was originally only in the solo, and I put it at the beginning of the song. And that's the first time that they ever saw a fly-in, and that's how he played at the beginning of the song. And that all happened one day. Mike got out again. Yeah, I still hear you. You look great. I can't hear
Oh,
you.
how's that?
Oh, there.
There we go.
Okay.
Some studio trickery, moving some stuff around. That's awesome. And I put the credits up for people real quick. But what an all-star! Michael Beinhorn on synths and stuff. Bill Laswell, of course, on bass, who we'll talk about in a minute as well. But Nona Hendricks, Bernard Fowler, Thylin Lay. Just it goes on. Nile Rodgers, Fred Frith, Nicky Scopolatis. I can't even read the list; it's so long. But what an all-star conglomeration of people for young Whitney to start her career with. And let's hear a little bit of that. Beautiful album, by the way, folks. Material One Down. That if you don't know,
I know I cannot leave this place full of memories, things like the way they knew us.
I mean,
All over town, we used to walk the streets together.
so the copyright police will come after us if we play much more than that. But wow, just to give people a taste, right? That voice, just her. So Whitney's first session, this gentleman right here, Robert Musso, incredible. I want to get a couple other quick takes on some other artists that you've worked with, and then we're going to go back to some other material that's coming out this year. Herbie Hancock, because you worked with him on a few things, and you did a remix of Rocket. Just give us a reflection or two of working with Herbie and his music.
Herbie is an incredible musician. He is truly phenomenal. His phrasing and his touch on keyboards, not just piano, but keyboards, is really, really phenomenal. He has that magic that very, 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 very few people have. And he's got it, and it's wonderful to hear him play, because he just makes it look so easy. He's one of those guys. He's got that touch. He's got that feel. And what's funny about Herbie is that, when I was at Rutgers Livingston, Kenny Barron was one of my teachers, and he had that touch for jazz. Now Herbie has that obviously also, but Herbie has kind of a wider scope because he was able to influence and be influenced by all this pop phrasing and all this funk phrasing as well. If you listen to Herbie, some of the things he plays, especially with more of his electric bands, they're really funky, like real on the one type of things, where you don't hear that with jazz playing. Well, with jazz phrasing, a lot of it's, and on the and beat or on the off beat. And, Herbie could do that too, but he's got it going on in many different styles is what I'm getting at. And he's really talented. And usually, Herbie is very cool to work with. He knows what's going on, and he's pretty relaxed in the studio. He kind of lets things happen, and he's cool. He's great, man. I love the man.
That's awesome. No, he seems lovable. I've never met him, but just watching interviews, videos, and things like that. Here's one that people don't think about sometimes. If we're talking about your music, 24/7 Spies.
Oh yeah.
What a great band, and Jimmy Hazel and the boys. How was that experience? Because that
was great. I love working with those guys. What was wonderful is that they were really, really tight, and they had great songs, and they were very talented. And so when I got them in the studio, it was easy for everybody, and it was quick. I think we did the whole album in like 3 days, as far as recording goes, and maybe mixed it in 1 day or 2 days. And it was really, really incredible. And I pulled out a few guitar tricks for Jimmy because I really liked his playing, and I still do. And I remember we had his Marshall half stack in an ISO booth that almost was too small for the amp. It was like the door closed, but there was no room on either side of the booth. You know, the room was too small for the amp, basically. And when he played, he filled up this little ISO booth with sound, and that's one of the killer guitar sounds on that record. It's the sound of the room. It's this little ISO booth with a gigantic amp in it. And it worked, you know, and I knew how to EQ it so that it sounds really good. So
That's wow, that's great. Well, very important record, folks, and it's a tough record to find. You know, it was on one of Mike Knuth's labels, right? What was that?
no, it was Relativity, I thought. Yeah.
Was it Relativity? Okay, yeah, yeah. Maybe he later on they were on one of his labels. Yeah, right. Relativity.
Yeah.
So, but folks, that debut 24/7 Spies record. I mean, all the records are great, but that one over the top, and that's one of the things. It just sounds great, and just one of the many afternoons or a couple of afternoons in the studio with Bob. Let's go to something here. This is a little document from the past. We were talking about Machine Gun a bit. Here's a bit of Machine Gun, and now I'm gonna get the technology together here. And this is Machine Gun almost 30 years ago, folks. So this is a little blast from the past. Let's take a look. 91. Young Bob. Wow. young Bob. We were also young. Look, young Jerome and Tom Chapin. Rest in peace. And the drummer's name was Bill? Was that Bill?
Bill Bryant.
Bill Bryant.
Yeah.
Wow.
Something I should mention is that with Machine Gun, you know, part of our charm was that we had no rehearsals and no sound checks. So we would just, you know, go and hit. And any kind of preparation we had was usually just kind of talking about it for less than 1 minute, you know, basically like what key you're going to start in. And that was it. You know, usually that was about the extent of our preparation for a gig. And so we would just go out and hit. And so, you know, it was truly 100% improvised.
I love it. And for me personally, what a massive influence that band. And I might have been at this show. I think I was. 1991. I was right there in New Brunswick. But that band and that whole ethos of improv music, which you know, meeting folks like yourself, just got me further into the whole world. So thanks again. Let's make sure I'm catching some of the YouTube questions here. Jerome says, back when we all had black hair. Yes, that's right. Derek asks, was this a few years ago? It does sound fresh. That was 30 years ago. Yeah, 1991, 30 years. And Hedda says, the hair's killing me. It is, right, Hedda? That Jerome can speak to this, but what bass was that? Was that that was a Steinberger, right? Was that one of your Steinbergers, Jerome? But that's one of the videos, actually, by the way. There is MussoMusic, and let's get some subscribers over there on MussoMusic YouTube, because there's, you know, a couple of videos there. There's Bob just very recently solo at the Stone in New York City, and also Machine Gun live in New York City. So
I think
we'll
this
put
is
that link up too.
I think
Say-
this
again?
is a, I think this is a wine rig up there too. It might be under John Ritchie or Lunar Ensemble, and I think it's called Breathe, and it was a tribute to Thomas Chapin at the Cittery Winery, and that was about a year before the pandemic. So that's a pretty good show. It's pretty cool. Anyway, go ahead. I'm sorry.
That's all good. No, please, you jump in with anything you want because it's all about meeting Robert Musso tonight. Let's go to another track and let me go back and see what I've got here. I've got something called Organic Pulse Final. So I'm gonna why don't you set that up and then I'll hit play.
Okay. This is a track that was I got from my friend Carlo Nicolai, who is a violinist who I've known for decades now and a really incredible player. And he is doing a record with, his name is Juan Cristobal Perez Grobet. And he's a bass player and Carlo's a violinist. And they asked me to play on the record. I think I'm playing on 4 or 5 tracks. And that's coming out hopefully in the next 6 months. And that album is called Echoes in Proximity. And yeah, it's a little different for me because of the guys. They're really great players, and they're a little more classically and jazz, straight up jazz oriented than I am. And so it was, a little more of a challenge, which I always am up for, hopefully. And yeah. Check this out. This is one of the tracks that needs to get mastered, but it's on the up and coming album. This is Echoes. Album is Echoes in Proximity, and the track is the one you said. Yes. Good. You might have to fast forward in a bit. Can you hear me? Okay.
Okay, great. Another little sneak preview, folks. World premiere, actually, a track called Organic Pulse. And that's with one of the upcoming records that Bob Musso has worked on. And that's, again, the gentleman's name is Carlo Nicolai. Is that correct? The violin player?
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah.
And great player, really great. I guess I should kind of point out, because everybody hasn't figured out by now, that I really try not to sound like anybody else, and it's tough. That's, I think, the hardest thing is not to sound like anybody else. I mean, when I was learning, I was like, okay, learn how to play Johnny Be Good, et cetera, and everything else. And, then it became, don't sound like anybody and try to not sound like anybody. Please don't sound like anybody, in hopes that I can try to sound like myself, so I do try. Sometimes it works.
And I think you do. You have so many influences that if people jump through some of these records over the years, it's because remember, folks, we went through Robert's biography just a little bit, and he studied jazz at Rutgers with the great Ted Dunbar and a couple of the other great jazz teachers at Rutgers. So I love that when all of a sudden you've done that in the middle of a show, you grab a jazz box and there's this cool, quiet thing happening when there was just this storm of insane notes and textures. So that's something too that I'm glad you touched on that, because your own music, which I really thought tonight we would make sure people know about that, as well as everything you've done for other records. It's so diverse. Tell us a little bit about your jazz studying at Rutgers, because it wasn't just Ted Dunbar. It was a few other of the great teachers at Rutgers. Wasn't that right?
Ted was my main teacher there, but I also, before Ted, I studied with George Naha, which is a great teacher who later became the musical director for Sam and Dave, believe it or not. And he's a great guy. And but during that time, I also was seeking out other teachers as well as Ted. And so I took a few lessons with John Schofield. And I also took a few lessons with Tal Farlow. Both times, both instructors made me feel very humble, because they're both great players. And Tal really made me realize that as wonderful as the physical body that was given me, that I cannot do everything with it, because I realized that Tal's fingers were literally 1 inch longer than mine. I mean, I'm not kidding, like 1 inch longer on each finger. That's how big his fingers were. And it wasn't until much later that when I worked with Steve Vai and then Buckethead, that these guys had the same thing. It's like fingers that could wrap around your wrist twice. It's unbelievable. And so because of that, Tal Farlow especially could play these chords and these runs that were just unbelievable, and that was just mind opening for me and very influential. And I love it, but I could never do it. So it was kind of tough, because he could do it and I couldn't do it. And so I figured I should just do what I can do and be happy with that. And, that's what I did. And so I was in the jazz ensemble too at Livingston, by the way. And so I got to play with a lot of all the guests that came in with the jazz ensemble. I ended up playing with them. And so that was fun. There's a whole list. I don't want to get into that right now, but a lot of lists, a lot of people. I played over years. And I've like, 1 or 2 gigs with somebody, or once sometimes, but I could say I did it, but sometimes it only happened once. But anyway, good.
No, those are great memories, and even if it's just one story, and the jazz pedagogy, again, I think that's what's such a unique part of your background, because you come into it with the rock, the growing up with Hendrix and the rock and roll and blues players, but it's that jazz side, I think, that's been a crucial thing with so many of these records. Now, of course, you did over 30 years of recording and producing on Bill Laswell's records. And I mean, right there, folks, we could do 2 hours on just those amazing releases. Of course, we've talked about Last Exit a little bit, but let's talk about another record that you did that also involved an early recording with certain amazing people. You just mentioned Steve Vai, for instance. Here's a record that Steve Vai was on that pretty early for him. I mean, he was around. I think Dave Lee Roth band had just happened, but he wasn't quite the giant guitar superstar he is now. He had done a Zappa tour or two. But this record, besides Steve Vai, I mean, let's look at the credits. Incredible, right? Bill Laswell, Nikki Skopelidis, Ryuichi Sakamoto, Bernie Worrell, Ginger Baker, and Tony Williams. My God, the drum chair alone, Bernard Fowler, and again, Jonas Hellborg, plus Shankar, Malky Favor, Steve Teray, Ayub Dieng. Just want to give respect to everyone on there, but let's talk a little bit about this record, because working with Johnny Lydon, Johnny Rotten, and all of these folks, give us a quick memory on this.
It was great. It was a very interesting time of my life because I was finishing the Tom Waits Rain Dogs record. I was doing that during the day and then started the PIL record at night. And so I was doing double duty for almost a month, which anybody could tell you is a lot of work. And so I didn't really sleep much, but it was a very great time because there were so many killer musicians, not only on the Rain Dogs record, but obviously, as you just mentioned, on the album. And it was great to hear and to record Steve Vai at that point in his life. He was young. It was before he ever had any guitar endorsements. And I think he was still living with his folks in Brooklyn, I believe it was, or on the island somewhere. And he was a great guitar player, back then. I mean, he played as great as he does now back then. That's how great he was. He was that great back then. Hands down, phenomenal player. And I've seen Eddie Van Halen live, and Steve Vai, and Satriani are right there. But it's a different world. And Steve Vai was great because he was taking influences from what Bill said about getting influenced from the Indian violin players like El Shankar or his brother El Submarinian. And all of these guys had this or Srinivas, these great players that had phenomenal melodic sense and were very lyrically elongated. They'd have these phrases and these lyrics and these themes that would be really, really long and developed. And that's basically what Bill turned Steve Vai onto. And that's what Steve Vai kind of did his own thing too for the album. And I remember we recorded a lot of his solos up at Electric Lady Studios upstairs in Studio B, and we had his guitars in the hallway. And so, we put the Marshall at the top of the stairs and Mike's down, 3 stairs and then 6 stairs and then 12 stairs down. And so it's the whole concrete stairway vibe with his guitar sound. And it was cool, I got along very well with him because I'm a musician. And so I knew exactly where to punch in. And so he loved me. And I said, okay, you want to go in right there? And he's like, oh yeah, that's the place, And so, same thing with like Bernie Worrell or Clinton, or George Clinton. It was the same thing. Like I was right there with them when they knew where to wanted me to punch in. And so with Steve Vai, it was the same thing. And so not only was he a great player, but he was also a pretty well accomplished studio musician, knowing how to get it right, in the studio at that point. And the story that I could tell you that was interesting was he was the first guitar player that I had ever seen where he had a guitar that had been worked on, modified to have a Floyd Rose bridge so he could do the big whammy bar stuff. But he also had a piece of plexiglass, over here on the top part that was up above the guitar, maybe almost a ½ inch. And so he would rest his wrist on the plexiglass so it wouldn't be on the bridge or wouldn't be on the body of the guitar. And so his wrist was up like this. And so he was picking more like this rather than like that. And that gave him more speed and more accuracy. And I thought that was interesting. And he was the first guy I saw that had that availability and had put plexiglass on his guitar like that. So that was cool. And, phenomenal player. I had a great time recording him because I learned a lot, and had a great sound.
No, that's awesome. Again, just such a, when that record came out, just you're going, wait, these are people from 5 different worlds, and I was a teenager. I was like, I was about 21 when they came out, and I was fortunate that I was into El Shankar and Steve from the Zappa side, and I was into Bernie Worrell from the funk and the fusion side, and knew about Tony Williams from the jazz side. But to have it all squeezed together, wow, great record, folks. If you don't know that record, again, everything we're talking about tonight should be on your listening list. But that PIL album, which also got Tony Williams onto rock radio, after all, there was some airplay from that big hit. You also recorded, wow, the great Tony Williams, just spectacular to work with him. But you recorded what's basically his last sessions, isn't that correct? Tell us a little bit about that and where some of that ended up.
Yeah, he, I think, had some time, and this is when we had the studio in Brooklyn, Greenpoint, Brooklyn. And he came there, and we got his, I remember his drum kit was delivered, and his drum tech came and set up his drums. And it was interesting because he was one of those advanced drummers back then that had microphones inside his drums. And so, like, even though there'd be a double-skinned drum, he had a microphone, a little microphone like that you'd put on a trumpet or something inside the drum. And so I not only had microphones on top of the drums, on the drum heads, but also I was taking the mics that were inside the drums and getting feeds from that. But the story is that we recorded him, and it wasn't really for any particular one album. We just wanted to get him on tape. And so we recorded, I think, a few hours of him, quite honestly, just playing all sorts of different things. And sometimes, I think, with Bill playing, sometimes by himself. And then those tracks eventually became other albums. And we used those tracks for several different projects that happened afterward, is what happened. And it became several albums. And so you can look it up, there, Tony Williams on these albums that came out after he passed. And that's what happened. They used it. Those tracks got used, including solo drums, which were really good. Anyway.
No, that's great. And I have one of the ones with Derek Bailey. There's another one with Buckethead. Mm-hmm. And so, yeah, again, the list of guitarists that you've worked with. Let's reflect on, you've also worked all around the world. And that's, hopefully you're writing a book, because there's just too many amazing, quick, and great stories. You were telling me the other day about being recording engineer in Japan for Last Exit and touring a bit with Sonny Sharrock. I just wanted to go to a clip real quick. This is just a trailer, actually, folks. If you have not seen this movie, you need to see Summer of Soul. All right? We've talked about that here. And what's remarkable about it, there's so many things, but one amazing thing is you get a glimpse of Sonny Sharrock. I'll just play a little bit of the trailer here, and you see him right after we see B.B. King.
The revolution will not be televised, will not be televised.
There we go.
Will not be televised.
If you blink.
Will not be televised, will not be televised. The revolution will be no rerun, brothers. The revolution
So,
will be live.
folks, if you haven't seen this,
Will not be televised, will not be televised, will not be televised.
it is
The revolution will be no rerun, brothers. The revolution will be live.
spectacular. And you have Gil Scott-Heron over the top of that. But amazing movie, because there was these concerts the same month as Woodstock, 5 or 6 weeks in a row. And I was blown away to see some Sonny Sharrock footage with Herbie Mann, of course, but also to have the wonderful Greg Tate do a little, like about a minute-long focus on Sonny, which was just incredible. As we all know that love this man and his music, he is still quite unsung. Give us a reflection or two of working with Sonny, whether in Japan or right there in Orange.
Sonny was a great guy, and you got to realize Sonny was really funny, but it's not like he told jokes or anything. Like, I tell bad jokes, as you know, but he doesn't tell jokes. He was just he would just look at something and he'd give you a look like, 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 and if if you know Sonny, you'd know that he's looking at something and he's cracking up inside because there's some very well-dressed upper echelon Japanese business person with his shirt hanging out the back of his suit or something, or something crazy. And Sonny would see that and go, mm-hmm. Or something like that. Anyway, Sonny was great, and I actually learned a lot from Sonny because he, believe it or not, was into a lot of basic stuff that I was also into, and he used to practice all the time in his hotel room. And here's a little trick for all you guitar players out there. Sonny used to carry 2 guitars. One of them, like the one that you're looking at now, would be his playing guitar. That would be his gigging guitar, Les Paul custom. And he had another guitar, which was a much less expensive guitar, and it would have really high action and really heavy strings. And he would practice on that. And he would practice scales and chords and all different things on this guitar that was really hard to play. And then he would get on the stage and play his main guitar, and it would be like butter. And so I learned that from Sonny. And so I would practice on a Fender 6-string bass, which has strings like almost like as thick as the bass guitar, except there's 6 strings like a guitar. And so I would practice scales on that. And then I would get on my normal guitar before the machine gun gigs and play a normal guitar. And, it was a lot easier that way. So that was a great trick that I learned from Sonny.
That's a great one. Yeah, like guitar push-ups, right? Do the hard work on the heavier strings. No, that's what a loss. I think we lost him at about age 53, which is kind of scary to think of. I'm 3 years older than Sonny Sharrock ever lived. But a doorway into an amazing chapter in music, folks. Again, those of you not familiar with Sonny Sharrock, which I can't imagine. Why would you even be here? But some amazing records. Ask the Ages, one of his last records with Pharoah Sanders and Elvin Jones, right, is on that.
Yeah, that's
Sharnette Moffett on bass.
right.
Really, really great record. And see that movie for sure. We're gonna wrap up in just a few, but we're gonna play another track from what Bob's been doing. Again, we're here with Bob Musso. We're just kind of chatting about what he's doing right now and just a few little things from the past. So, Bob, we already addressed 2 of the releases coming out. The one with Carlo Nicolai and the other one with WMW is the temporary name or the tell us what else is kind of in the next 6 months for you releases.
Well, let me work. If you don't mind, I'd just like to list everything that's kind of been happening last couple of years.
Please.
And just, this is not in any particular order. There's a group that I have a couple albums out with called The Mineral Red with Mark Daterman, my friend, and Melanie Silvernail, vocalist. There is a whole series of loft recordings that were done in Manhattan before the pandemic with Mark Hennon and Jackson Kroll. And I have probably 10 albums worth of releasable music. I just have to get that edited. And also Elliot Levin plays on that. And John Bloom plays on it as well. But Mark Hennon's keyboard player, a very big Cecil Taylor disciple. And so it's very cool improvisation. And that's the Downtown Upstairs Loft series. There's one album that's out on the label so far. There's an album called Dream of the Grumbler with Joe Hertenstein on drums. I don't know if you know Joe, and Mark Daterman and myself. There's a protest album we put out called The Song of Unrest. I did a track, a solo on the new Dr. Nerve album. My friend Nick Didkovsky asked me to do that. And so I played on the Dr. Nerve record with him and Jesse Krakow. And I met Nick through Henry Kaiser when we were doing the Echoes for Sunny record that's coming out. And there's another loft record of Joe Hertenstein and Mark and myself, although that's coming out. Also, there are some poets that we're thinking about putting out. We did do a Marvin Bell record, and Mark plays on that, and Glenn Moore, for the bass player from Oregon, plays on that, and so that came out. And there's a lot in the works. There's a few other things. I'm sure I missed something, so I apologize if I missed anybody's name or anybody's albums, but there's a lot in the works.
Just staggering, and I love it because this is the pace that I've observed for the 30 plus years I've known this man. Just always a positive vibe. First of all, always happy about music and bringing it in joy and just nonstop. It's inspiring, and so many different parts of the kaleidoscope. We're gonna play another track, and I wanted to well, let's start there, and then we'll come back to some other things. So I'm gonna tell you the title again. You could set this one up and let us know. Again, folks, these are a couple world premieres we thought we would put together here of music that Robert Musso is involved in. We've got this one. It's just labeled JR, which is, of course, Jerome Parker Wells, a wonderful bass player who's going to be on this show a little later on this summer. You've seen him on my Meatless Monday show talking about plant-based touring around the world, and he's been recording some amazing new music. Look for Jerome on Instagram, where he shares a lot of what he's doing in his home studio. But this track is marked Jerome with Calvin 2 mix. Tell us about that, and I'll hit play.
All right. Please excuse me. These are working titles. When we, working on songs, we just have to distinguish them from the last song and the next one. So this one is essentially Calvin 2, part of the Jerome Parker Wells project. So that's how that's labeled. And it's the mix number. And so it doesn't have a final title yet, but it will. So this is a working title. How's that for?
That's good. Okay, here we go.
That'll be good. Okay.
All right. Yeah, a bunch of that track, untitled so far, but really just another great sounding track. I love how the drums are recorded. Are you doing like some EBow type stuff on that? What's that?
There's a Les Paul track through my distortion overdrive setup. There is a whammy track that also has a harmonizer attached to it. That's doing the swoops, the wahs. And then there is also an EBow track that's doing a drone underneath. So yeah, you got it right. All three. Yeah.
That's great. And again, just people might think, is that a synthesizer? But not really. It doesn't really sound like that. But I love that there's layers of cool stuff happening. Let's go make sure we don't miss out on some YouTube questions. People are just saying we love Bob. A couple new fans. I love this. Here's some. Yeah, Mark Daterman is here. Okay, Mark LaPelusa. Mark LaPelusa says, "Thank you, Robert, for everything you've done in your career. It brought me countless hours of joy." That is fantastic. And I love that Wes Darling, good to see you, Wes. Wes says, I didn't know who Robert Musso was until right now, but he mixed my favorite album of all time, Hallucination Engine. Now I'm in awe of this guy. Thank you. That's a big reason I did this, because I think folks like Bob in general, but Bob particularly, you go flip through any eclectic record collection. If you're into funk, jazz, rock, if you're into some of these legends like Stevie Wonder or Herbie Hancock or Brené Worrell or Johnny Rotten, the list is amazing that you can find this man's name on. So I love that many of you are discovering that tonight. Thank you. Derek, I love Pharoah Sanders. Yeah, he worked with Pharoah also. So thank you, folks, for checking this out. Mark is asking if I'm in a surveillance van. Perhaps. Someone is asking also, Derek's asking, when did you work with Iggy Pop? What record was that? Or what tour was that?
It was an album called Instinct, and it's the album that has Pet Cemetery on it. And it was it cool? Cold Metal was the first single on the album, I believe. And it's funny. I saw him. I recorded the album, and then he played Webster Hall, and I saw him like the day after the album was done, play Webster Hall, and he played all the songs on the album as well as all his hits. So that was cool. Yeah, Iggy's great. I love Iggy. Funny guy.
Iggy is amazing. Yeah, and just, I mean, the Stooges, just groundbreaking. Another artist I'd like you to reflect on, and you said, two. Let's talk about. You said the other day you've worked with thousands of vocalists, but you said the best one you feel is working with Al Green. I mean, wow, what a voice! How about tell us a bit about working with the great Al Green?
Al Green was great to work with. What a professional, multi-talented, just incredibly sweet guy. And when I worked with him, it was in London. And I think we worked not only at Air Studios, but also at, I forget the name of the other studio. It was a new Metropolis Studios. It was brand new when we worked there. And it was with Dave and Andy from the Fine Young Cannibals. And I recorded Al Green there on, I think it was 6 or 7 songs, and it was just one better take after another. And it just blew me away. And, it's like the Whitney Houston story, except that Al Green had made 20 records, and so it was like he already had done it all and has this incredible voice and incredible control over his voice. I never worked with Barry White, but I think it might have been like, one of those kind of situations. But I don't know. Al Green was for me a really, 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 really great privilege to work with. And the funny part about that session is that I also recorded Pretty Purdy the drummer on that session before we even did the vocals. And I saw him about 2 years ago. My wife is a judge for one of the jazz blues competitions down the shore. And he showed up at one of the shows. And so I saw him again and I go, yeah, I met you at the Al Green recording. And he goes, really? He goes, you mean? I go, yeah, in London. He goes, I recorded you. He goes, oh yeah, that was in London. So it was funny. He knew it was me that recorded him. But yeah, so I recorded Pretty Purdy, and then I saw him again. And that was the same day that I recorded Al Green. And so that was one of those days, great day in the studio.
Just another day in the Bob Musso studio calendar, it's fantastic. Right. No, well, before we close with one other artist, kind of randomly from this amazing list, I wanted your thoughts, because you've been here for this whole journey of kind of where we had, if we were lucky, a 4-track reel-to-reel. That was a big deal. Like in the late 70s, early 80s, you can get those. Then you went to Porta Studios, and then you had the very first, Ataris and Macs and things. Now, you could go to a pawn shop, get a $200 used computer, download Reaper, compressor software, free synthesizers, free reverbs, everything like that. Give us your thoughts on that democratization of music, because a barefoot kid in Bombay or Newark or anywhere can do a record. Tell us your thoughts on that, where that has taken us.
I think it's great, and I think it's not great. And here are the reasons. When I started, it's exactly what you said. I had 2 cassette recorders, and I would record on one cassette and then play that back and record on the second cassette. After 3 or 4 passes, all you hear is tape hiss. But that's how I got started. And it wasn't until I got my first taste of a real recording studio that I said, wow, that's the reason that my records in my basement don't sound like the records I hear on coming across the radio. And I wanted to hear the difference. And when I found out all the equipment and the microphones and the technique and the talent that was involved, I realized, this is a business that one really has to learn to be good at. And the fact that nowadays you can, like you said, buy a computer and get some free software, that's great for people who want to get into the business and want to learn and want to express themselves. There's absolutely nothing wrong with that, in my opinion. I think that's great. However, if you want to make a real professional recording with professional production standards and professional recording awareness, let me put it that way, you have to at least have a person there that knows what those things are. So you might not actually even need the equipment, but you need the knowledge and the know-how of what to do to make those records great. The musical know-how. Louie Louie was recorded, I think, with like one microphone above the drummer or something like that. It's ridiculous, and it's a hit song. But that's that. And, it's the music that matters. It really is the music that matters. The recording technology is great. I love it. Obviously, I've made a living, doing it. But it's the music and the creativity, or the stretching of the creativity, like your show is saying, that I think is the fun part about it. Try to do something different. Try to be your own person. Try to sound like yourself. I think it's a great goal. It's not an easy goal, but it's a great one. If you can really sound like yourself, or if somebody hears you on the radio or I'm playing and says, oh man, I knew that was you. Mission accomplished. So that's my feeling about that.
No, that's great. What a great and positive and a balanced answer, because you give the yin yang there. And I think you nailed the 2 important parts, just in my personal opinion. It's about the music, the songs. Get the music together, folks. Like, it's amazing how much we have to say that. But it's the music, but also what you said, somebody who knows what's going on here. Someone who I imagine you mean knows about gain stages and panning and basic stuff, compression and how close to move a microphone, all those things.
And even more basic than that, tuning and timing. You gonna play in tune, or are you gonna be in time? And let's start with the basics. Anyway, go ahead. Sorry.
No, please. That's great, and I love that you brought up the end of the spectrum of something like Louie Louie, where there's mistakes in there. The vocalist comes in at the wrong, So that's a great point. That it can work, but you gotta study the craft and see what's happening. We're gonna wrap up with. I hate to wrap up. This is such fun. Thank you so much, Bob, and folks. Follow up on MussoMusic.com. You can order this man's records direct, and we talk a lot about on Make Weird Music about supporting artists in this direct fashion that's now possible with the internet. That's one of the pros, actually, of the pro and con back and forth. Artists can now remove all of the middle people and go right to you. So you've got a little snapshot of the kaleidoscope of music that Robert's been involved in over the years. Do your homework here. Go check out MussoMusic, YouTube, the website, find his stuff. And just kind of study the records that he's been a part of, and you'll realize I have 20 of these great records. Someone asked, let the stars shine in, asked a great question about an artist that I touched on, asked about Sly and Robbie's language barrier, and you are correct. There's Laswell production, but twisting the knobs, miking up the equipment, making it sound great was once again Bob Musso. And what a great record. Besides Sly and Robbie, Herbie's on that one, and Bernie Worrell, right? Bernard Fowler, Pat Thrall. I mean, you can't make up some of these weird combinations. So tell us a little bit about maybe that record, but tell us more about Bernie Worrell, your dear friend, who's another person that we've said goodbye on this earthly plane. Talk a little about Bernie and maybe a bit about that record.
Bernie and I really got along well. Really from the first time we met, we just really hit it off, just musically and personally. If I hang out with him, I buy him a drink, but even beyond that, it'd be great to work with him. And he played on my records, and I tried to help him a lot on his records in many different ways. But there's one really funny Bernie story. Do you mind if I tell it? So this is with Miles Davis. Okay. So we're in Paris at Studio Plus Trente, and Bernie is playing a Fairlight that was set up in the control room, and we had just gotten into the studio, and the Fairlight was set up from the day before. So Bernie's playing it, getting ideas together, and I asked the assistant to put the tape on the machine and get ready to record. And the person took longer than they should have. And Miles Davis had came in, and he was listening to Bernie. And Miles Davis came in, and he was dressed all in black. I'm not going to condense the story here. And he was asking me about the studio. And at this point in the early 80s, it was a brand new SSL console. So I said, this is a brand new SSL console, and these are Uri A13 monitors, and we have studio tape decks and blah, blah, blah. And so Miles was asking me all these questions while Bernie was playing the Fairlight, figuring out stuff. Finally, the assistant put the tape on the machine, rewound it, and hit record. Bernie couldn't remember what he was doing. And I'm like, oh my God, we missed it. And Miles comes to me, and he pulls a little tape recorder out of his pocket. He goes, okay, I got it right here. And he had been recording everything that I was saying, and he recorded Bernie's ideas. And so we had Bernie's ideas, and so Bernie heard it and played it.
That is, I've heard a lot of good Miles Davis stories, but that Miles bootlegging in the studio saves the session. Yeah, that's that.
I never recorded Miles, but wanted to.
Right, but you did a session with him. That's fucking great. Well, and then
I couldn't make that.
You can't make that stuff up. But Bernie, of course, you did so many recordings of his own music and him as a guest on Material and different things, and of course, Public Image.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Well, Bernie can play anything. Piano or synthesizer or organ. There was one time when we wanted him to record a piece. I think it was on a Deadline record for Philip Wilson, and I think it was Bernie. And I know it was Bernie, but I'm not sure it was that record. But he was playing a baby grand piano, and we had prepared the piano. We had put a lot of things in the piano, like utensils, knives, and forks and containers of all sorts of things that we had found, so that he would hit a key and go, cling, be like prepared piano, right? And so at one point during the recording, Bernie heard what he was doing, right? And he realized what was happening. And there was a can of Zud. I don't know if you know what Zud is. It's like Ajax, right? And there's a can of Zud, and he was hitting it, and it wasn't the way he wanted it. So he reached over and he adjusted the can of Zud inside the prepared piano. And so he adjusted the Zud to get the right sound in the prepared piano. So there's stuff for you.
That's awesome. And I'm glad you said that too, because what's remarkable about Bernie that people may or may not know, a master in the classical piano kind of world, the jazz world, the avant-garde experimental world, some prepared piano to that point, and all the wild stuff he did on a Mini Moog early on, and soundscapes. And when you saw Bernie live, you got all of that. You got show tunes, you got solo stuff. So that's a great memory. Well, folks, we're gonna wrap up. Thank you so much. I put one more link up there for people too, because again, if you just go to MussoMusic, you'll learn a lot about what this gentleman has been doing and what he continues to do. But I put another link up for the Discogs of MuWorks records, because again, just to kind of be scholarly about it and go through, which I have a lot of scholars that check the show out. But when you get the scope of all these records he's released, not only his great solo records, but as we've talked about, people like Thomas Chapin, Verona Clough, who we didn't get to talk about, but amazing drummer, Machine Gun, all these great records. Go check it out. That John McCracken record's another excellent one. And so many great records with Laswell, Sharrock, John Zorn. So do check this out, Discogs and MussoMusic.com, and you'll learn what's happening. And stay tuned to Make Weird Music, because when these records come out, we do highlights and reviews, and I know we'll be talking about this again. So just going to see if there's a closing question or two. Mark LaPelusa, thank you so much for reminding people. Please check out Bob's solo records. Great sound and playing. Yes, he is.
Thank you.
And yes, and it is great music. And we got the links up there. Thank you, Sharon. We got the YouTube links. And lots of love for Miles and Bernie and everyone. Derek says, yes, always adjust your Zud before playing. This is true. So, all right, folks. Thank you so much. Thanks for being here. We'll be here in 2 weeks, Confronting Creativity. But on Wednesday, August 4th, that's in about 5 days, in exactly 5 days, I've got somebody that I will meet live that day, a guy named Joel Corte. And Joel is the inventor and the CEO and the crazy mind behind Chase Bliss pedals. So if any of you guitarists and musicians know Chase Bliss, amazing company with kind of alien technology pedals, we're going to be talking to him. And a couple weeks after that, we're going to be talking to Robert Keeley and his team, another pedal company. So we're going to be getting into the tools of the trade, which we do every other Wednesday. And then coming up on Confronting Creativity, we've got a couple amazing artists, including Pamelia Kirsten. We're going to have Dorit Chrysler back again. We're going to have a lot of interesting people coming up. And I appreciate you subscribing, liking, and supporting Make Weird Music. Thanks so much. Robert, stick around for a minute after I end the stream here. See you soon, folks.
Thank you.
And okay, cool. It's just us.